Hello, this is the monthly webinar of Hashimoto's Awareness. Hello everyone, my name is Fabienne Hemmans and I'm here with Pearl Thomas. You want to say hi?
Hi everyone! We're having a little bit of some connection issues, so if we're having a little bit of stall in our voices, we apologize. We're still here.
And our guest of the month is Dr. Marc Ryan. Hello. Marc is very dear to us. He was actually the one that introduced each other, Pearl and I, 3 years ago. So we are very grateful for that. And today, Dr. Marc is going to introduce you to the 5 elements of endocrine health, a look into the amazing physiology of the endocrine system within the context of the 5 elements. And Marc Ryan is a HeyHashi author, graduate of Cornell University, and a licensed acupuncturist and herbalist in the state of California, where he practices functional medicine. Excuse me. After suffering from his own battle with Hashimoto's and discovering an alternative approach to healing, he decided to devote his life to doing everything he could to help others find hope, help, and healing. In the last 4 years, he has spent thousands of hours researching, working with, and talking to over 2,000 Hashimoto's patients. And Pearl is now going to guide you through some important logistics.
Hey everyone, if you can hear me, can you just raise your hand? Because I think we're having some major difficulties with the internet connection. Can you hear me? Just click the little hand raise if you can hear me. Okay, people are doing. Okay, cool, great. Yeah, sorry about the slow connection. We're not quite sure what's happening. You might have missed a few things about Marc in that section, but just to let you know, he's amazing, and we're super, super honored to have him here tonight. So welcome, we're excited to have you. Your microphone is actually going to be turned off, so if you have a question, you can just type it in the questions box on your control panel, and we just want to be really clear on that because it's just the questions box. You can ask questions throughout the duration of the webinar, and then if you want to remain anonymous, just please type a note at the end in your question. There's a few key features of this webinar just for you to know if you haven't been here before. Number one is the hand raising. Obviously, a bunch of you know what that is, but the hand raising is just a button that you just press. Maybe you all can try it again. Just click your hand if you can find it. Just click it. Okay, people are clicking. Okay, cool. It's really simple. Great. We might ask you to raise your hand during the webinar just to kind of see a poll of, certain questions that the speaker might be asking you. So please participate. We love it. It's awesome to have you there and participating. Number two, there's actually there's a polls that are going to be happening. The polls are going to go throughout the talk. And what that's going to mean is that there's going to be something that just pops right up on your screen. And just click your answer when you see the multiple choice question. And we'll give it about 60 seconds before we let the poll end. And then just about, Marc actually has a free gift that he's going to be giving out. And that free gift is actually going to be a link that will be connected to a follow-up email that you're going to receive in the next 24 to 48 hours. So please look out for that email that you're going to receive with the incredible information he's going to just give to you for free. It's basically a starter kit on healing Hashimoto's, which is going to include like tons of recipes, chapter from his new book from HeyHashi, and an infographic on the Hashimoto's diet. So we're really excited that he was so generous to give all of us that gift. Yeah, so Marc, take it away.
Thank you so much. Wonderful introduction. I'm super excited to be here. Hello, people. So what we're going to do is I'm going to jump over to, I prepared a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to do that. And then, as Pearl said, there'll be a couple questions interspersed throughout it. So we'll do a couple polls in the middle. And then after it's done, we're going to go to a Q&A, and I'll answer any questions that you have. And if we run out of time, then we're going to figure out a way to get your questions answered. Either way, either go over to my Facebook group or you can email me or what have you. So we're going to try to answer as much as we can and cover as much as we can in a relatively short amount of time. Super excited.
Thank you, Marc.
Thanks again. Okay, so I'm going to go over now to the presentation. Yes?
Yes, please.
Here we go. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So our talk today is about the 5 elements of the endocrine system. And for some reason it's not forwarding. There we go. Okay, who knows what this is? Can you guys can they answer this question in the...
So if you know what this looks like, raise your hand. So
raise your hand.
Yeah.
Are people raising their hands? I can't see that.
Yes, they are. They're raising their hands. There's a bunch of people raising their hands. They're like, okay, they actually know what this is. So which is super cool. There's tons of people. Wow, that's amazing. Okay.
This is called a Sierpinski triangle. And this is something that's a fractal, basically. And fractals are a curve or geometric figure that have the same characteristic no matter where they are. If they're really small or really big, the same pattern exists. And this is something that's really common in nature, right? We see this in like this shell. You can see the same pattern here repeats, gets larger and larger and larger in this nautilus shell. In this is a kind of cauliflower, I think. You can see here the same pattern. There are these knobs on it, and on the knobs themselves are these little knobs, and it's the same pattern totally repeated. And our bodies too have this phenomenon where they're also fractal, I believe. So in Chinese medicine we have that you can treat the whole body from the ear. You can also treat the whole body from the feet. There's reflexology that again, the body's kind of repeated here on the feet. And there's a whole hand system as well. The whole body can be treated through the hand. So this is something that's totally found throughout nature. And the ancient Chinese understood this. And they understood this with certain philosophies, right? And one of them is yin and yang. Yin and yang is totally fractal in the same way. It's just like this Sierpinski triangle, right? You see, no matter how small you get, there's yin and yang. Like even within the atom, there's the electron and the proton. And then you go out into the larger universe, and there's black holes and huge solar systems. So that exists throughout nature. And in a way, the 5-element system that we're going to be talking about today is another example of this. It's also something that we see repeated throughout different parts of the body and throughout different systems. And what's also cool about the 5 elements is it's a wonderful way to understand very complex systems and how they interact. And this is what it is. It's really a system for understanding these interactions. And why does this matter? Why am I talking about this? Why do I spend all this time? Well, because this is one thing that I've learned in studying for years and years physiology is that it's not linear, right? We can't reduce it to these singular events. And a lot of Western medicine does that. It's like they focus on one piece. Like Hashimoto's, it's just a thyroid problem. You just take this thyroid hormone. Well, it's not really true in real life, right? These things aren't singular events. There's all these different signals, all these different feedback systems, and they're all happening at once. And if we're going to try to understand this and learn what's happening so that we can heal it, we have to have some way to wrap our minds around it. And so, you know, what I can say is like, you can't fix what you can't understand. So if it's just a reductive view that only looks at one system, it doesn't help us understand these interactions, and it's not as helpful in helping us heal. Because if we can understand the functions, then we have a much better chance of understanding how we can heal. Okay, everybody, how was that? I was like a lot of information there right at once. Everybody with me still? Can we get a hand raise? How are people doing?
Doing good. You got their attention.
Cool.
Certainly.
Yeah, everyone's getting it. Awesome.
Cool. So in my book, which is coming out, that she mentioned from HeyHashi, it's currently on Amazon. Actually, you can get the book. I talk about the 5 elements of thyroid health in the book, where I look at I use the 5-element system to describe how the thyroid affects all these different systems. And in researching that book, and since, I actually created a professional course that I teach at Bastyr University. And from that, I discovered, holy cow, there's actually a 5 elements of just the endocrine system. And then I started really looking into all of this physiology, and it's amazing how this system explains these interactions. So today I'm going to just take one little piece of this because the course I teach is 16 hours long and we don't have time to do all that. But I want to take a little piece from you today, show you how it works so you can understand that interaction, and I want you to have some takeaways from it, things that you can put into motion right away with this fractal system. So let's just take a moment. I want to set a little intention here for the rest of the presentation. How can I serve you today? I want you to just think about for a second, set the intention. What would you like to get out of today's talk? And I can't remember. Pearl, can they put an answer in there or what they want, or it's just we can't get their answer yet?
Yes, they can if they want.
Okay, so if anyone wants but take a moment to think about it. For me, my intention is I want you guys to come away with one aha moment and one actionable thing that you can actually do.
Okay. So Mark is saying just write your intentions in the question box. So if you want to do that right now, go ahead and do that, and I will let him know
just read me a couple
what your intention is.
Yeah.
Okay, right now we have, Kimberly says, I would like to learn more about how to make my body heal.
Okay, perfect.
Donna says, to activate my lazy thyroid so I can lose my weight.
Good.
Know how to do that. To raise my own awareness to another level.
Yes.
Gianne's intention is to lower her rapid heart rate.
Okay.
So we got a great one. All right, great.
Cool.
So thank you, ladies. Okay.
Those are all fantastic. Yeah. So we will touch on a number of those issues. Okay, here's a quick presentation overview. We're going to cover a little introduction and background, although Fabian already did that, so I'm going to jump over that actually. The 5-element system, I'm going to show you there are two types of relationships in it. We'll touch a little bit on this endocrine system, and then I'm going to show you one key relationship in it. And the big takeaway there is, what are leverage points? So leverage points, by that I mean, where can we look at this system and figure out some places where we can take action and have the biggest result. So I'm going to show you in one key relationship these leverage points, and then how to use these leverage points for healing. And then we'll do a Q&A afterwards. So as Fabian mentioned, I'm an acupuncturist and herbalist. Here's my contact information. If you want, you can always email me at mark@hashimotoshealing.com if you have any further questions after today or anything you want. We also have a Facebook group. It's /Hashimoto's Healing. We talked about that already. I'm just going to say, as a result of the last several years of study, since I'm going to share in a moment my Hashimoto story. But basically, I've been at this for many, many years, and really devoted the last 4 years of my life to helping people with Hashimoto's. And during that time, I've spoken to over 2,000 people with Hashimoto's. Over 1,000 of those conversations were from free consultations. So I've learned a tremendous amount about this disease, and people have shared their stories with me. And that's a lot of what I ended up putting in my book, are a lot of those experiences and a lot of learning that I have. My own personal story, just quick, like Reader's Digest version. As I said, I've been at this for about 20 years and gone through a lot professionally. Prior to 4 years ago, I had a large practice, a multidisciplinary clinic that was in San Pedro here in the port of LA. And had like 12 employees, and it was a huge 4,500 square foot space. It was very, very busy. and super stressful. And we went through this whole thing with a recession hit, and the business kind of crashed, and some other things happened, and the stress really affected me and really got, I think in retrospect was one of the things that totally set off my Hashimoto's. And first I didn't know what was happening. I was just tired all the time, and I had terrible brain fog and memory issues. I gained about 25 pounds, bloating and inflammation, and I just felt terrible, and I had no idea what was happening. And the thing that finally sent me to the doctor was I had this terrible stabbing eye pain. And I went to all these different doctors, went to 3 different eye doctors, and like no one could find anything. And finally one doctor found an antibody for something called ankylosing spondylosis, which is a different autoimmune disease. And basically I went to a couple other doctors, and they ended up saying, yeah, well, we're just going to take a look at it, or we'll keep an eye on it, and if it gets bad enough, we'll put you on medication and suppress your immune system and what have you. I was like, well, that doesn't make sense. I want to wait till it gets bad enough, because that means your spine basically fuses and you're in a wheelchair. Like I don't want to wait to get to that point. So I started taking my own initiative and working on myself, and got a special, got on an autoimmune diet and started treating myself with functional medicine and Chinese medicine. And I started to feel a lot better. I lost that 25 pounds of bloating inflammation. I started to get my energy back. I started to get my brain back. And as a result of losing that weight, I discovered that I had these, I hadn't seen it before because I was heavier. I had these lumps in my throat. I went to see the doctor, and long story short, I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And at that point, basically, the doctor said kind of the same thing to me. They were like, well, yeah, you got all your thyroid numbers are normal. Just your antibodies are high. My antibodies were, my TPO was 1,200 at the time. It was super high. And they said, well, we're just going to keep an eye on it. When it gets bad enough, your thyroid will die off, and we'll put you on Synthroid. So it's like, again, it was the same message I was getting from the doctors was, we're going to do nothing until it gets bad enough. So, my question is, well, why is that the standard of care for autoimmunity and Hashimoto's? Like, that was really the thing that motivated me to be like, I don't know. There's got to be another way. There's got to be a different approach here. There's got to be something else that we can offer people. And that's what I've spent, the last several years studying and learning and figuring out. And in that time, I've gotten a lot better myself. My daughter was diagnosed with Hashimoto's during that time. And as I said, I've worked with about 2,000 different people. So we have a question here. Just everyone raise their hand. Here's a little question. How many people can relate to stress being a major factor in their Hashimoto's?
Okay, I'm looking at the hands raised. There's a lot going on.
A lot of people?
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is super common. I think this is something we see all the time. And I know a lot of people I've talked to, this is a major factor.
Me too.
And this little minion here is a perfect example. I love that picture. Yeah, it's a major factor for all of us. So we're going to take a look now at this 5-element idea of the endocrine system, and I'll show you why I think that is true. So in the 5 elements, you see this larger image here. There are 2 kinds of relationships that we're going to look at, and they're important in that it teaches us in a way about interactions within the body, right? So there's a nurturing and a controlling insulting sequence, and the nurturing is like a mother-child relationship. So when one's sick, it affects the other, and it's mutually supportive, and it kind of goes in both directions. And if you look at this little portion of the chart, really the pancreas, the thyroid has this nurturing relationship, and the thyroid and the adrenals has this nurturing relationship. So it's kind of mother-child. Okay, so we're going to do a little poll now. Pearl, if you could bring up the poll in the blood sugar question. So,
all right, we're going to be pulling up this poll. Here we go.
Yeah, we're going to be talking a little bit about some blood sugar issues. So how many people have blood sugar issues? And there's a poll there, so you have a choice of questions: hypoglycemia, insulin resistance, or both. And hypoglycemia is low blood sugar, so that would be, like if you between meals, if your sugar crashes, you get irritable or lightheaded, you don't have trouble focusing, you feel better when you eat. Insulin resistance is a problem where really you feel tired after eating, especially if you have carbs. It's one of those things that's kind of pre-diabetes. Also, some people have both and some people have none. Okay, so we're going to give you a couple minutes or a minute to answer. How much time? We just need 60 seconds to answer that?
We have about 10 seconds left, and
okay,
the poll will close.
Perfect. And blood sugar issues, as this picture tells us, is often made. Okay, cool. So our result here is a lot of people, so the most common is hypoglycemia, about 24%. 13% have insulin resistance. 17% have both. That's interesting. Then 46% have none of the above. Interesting. Okay, cool. So I think relatively common, at least half the people have some version of that. So here's one thing we would just look about this relationship between blood sugar and the thyroid. Well, insulin resistance, if you have that, can cause problems with conversion of T4 to T3, which means there's less thyroid hormone available. It can also increase destruction of the thyroid gland in autoimmune disease, it's found. So sugar balance is really, really critically important. And then the opposite relationship also exists, where when you're hypothyroid, it affects all of these things in relation to blood sugar. Right? Hypothyroidism slows down the rate of glucose uptake by cells, so meaning the absorption of sugar into your cells. It decreases the rate of sugar in the gut, absorption there. It slows the response of insulin to elevated blood sugar, so that's when you get this insulin resistance. And it slows the clearance of insulin from the blood. So whenever there's a thyroid problem, it affects all of these different aspects of blood sugar. So that's the thyroid and pancreas. So you can see there's that relationship. It really goes in both directions here. Mother, child, both are impacted by that. When the child is sick, the mother gets sick. Okay, the next we're going to do another poll now. This one is related to cortisol. And our question is, how many people, how many of you are aware of your cortisol? Have you had it tested? And if you have, what have you found? Have you found high, low, normal? All right, so Pearl's going to do this second poll as well. So again, how many of you have abnormal cortisol levels, either high, low, a mix of high and low? Some people have that throughout the day, or normal. And again, we'll give you about 60 seconds for this.
Okay, we just have about 20 seconds left. Complete your votes.
Very cool. So our results here, again, a lot of people have these issues as well. So 30% had high cortisol, 20% have low, about 32% had a mix of high and low, and 18% was normal. So almost 80% have some abnormal cortisol rhythm. So very interesting. So again, if we look here, what happens when your cortisol is high? Well, cortisol directly inhibits an enzyme called 5-alpha dehydrogenase, which converts T4 to T3. and this can lead to low T3 levels. So you're just not getting enough in the body. Also, high cortisol can cause thyroid hormone receptor insensitivity, which means that even if you do have enough T3 circulating, that it may not be able to bind normally to the receptor sites. And when this happens, it doesn't get into the cells. And when it doesn't get into the cells, it doesn't work. So, very interesting, that relationship. Cortisol will also increase the production of reverse T3. Right? Reverse T3, if you're not aware, it's kind of the anti-hormone. The body converts T4 into T3 and reverse T3. It's because thyroid hormone is so biologically active, the body has to have some way of shutting it down, and reverse T3 is that way. So in times of stress, in times of, when we don't need more stimulation, it shuts down thyroid hormone. So even if with chronic stress, like high elevated cortisol, the body can interpret that as a time where we need to shut down thyroid hormone. Reverse T3 can also increase production of something called thyroamines, which themselves cause more hypothyroid symptoms. So low body temperature, fatigue, depression, all those things, and insulin resistance. Cortisol also lowers the level of thyroid binding globulin. So that's the thing that circulates thyroid hormone and carries it stably throughout the body. If there's not enough of that, then not enough can be sent around the body. And finally, elevated cortisol can slow TSH production by messing with the HPA axis. That's the hypothalamic pituitary feedback, and that leads to lower TSH production. So your TSH may appear lower, but you still may have all these hypo symptoms. And you can kind of see that in this diagram. You also see this relationship of the adrenals to pituitary thyroid. That's that feedback loop that we're talking about. Okay, so that was the nurturing sequence. So the pancreas to the thyroid, thyroid to the adrenals, the mother-child kind of relationship. You can see how intertwined they really are. One is affected by the other dramatically. Then we have this other relationship of the adrenals to the pancreas, and this is called the controlling or insulting sequence, and really this describes feedback mechanisms where one system regulates another. And the controlling is, in this case, the adrenals really control the pancreas and cortisol controls insulin. And then in that relationship also is kind of the keys to pathology and dysfunction. Here's some examples. So if you have an abnormal stress response, here's how this affects sugar problems. With low cortisol, you have problems breaking down glycogen, which is stored sugar, into glucose. This can result in low blood sugar. This can make you hypoglycemic. Right? So that's when you're fatigued or irritable between meals and you feel energized after meals. But this can chronically do that. Then also, if you have an abnormal stress response where you have overactive adrenals or high cortisol, this is the opposite. It does a faster breakdown of glycogen into glucose, which means you're flooded with glucose, which means you can develop insulin receptor resistance. That's where you get insulin resistance, and you get this high blood glucose. And this is the most common symptom of this is fatigue after meals, especially after eating carbohydrates, and again, that insulin resistance. So the other part of this is when you have these insulin surges, big spikes of insulin, and then crashes, this can lead to high cortisol. And this whole cascade, this whole web of problems can result. So when your blood sugar drops, your adrenals release cortisol, they try to balance that sugar. So what does this tell us? What does this information tell us? What does it help us understand? Well, really, important takeaway here is blood sugar issues are stress issues, and stress issues are blood sugar issues. These are not separate issues, right? And the thyroid is caught in the middle. So I just want to let that sink in for a second, because I think this is really, really important. A lot of times we have a tendency to think, like, isolate these things and think they're all separate. But what this shows us is these aren't isolated events. These things really are one and the same. So if you want to balance your blood sugar, you have to deal with stress. And if you want to deal with stress and straighten out your adrenals, you have to pay attention to balancing your blood sugar. It's super important, both of them. And again, the thyroid is caught right in the middle. So these are, as I was talking about at the beginning, major points of leverage. This is a place where if you really devote time and energy to this, you're going to see some major results. Because this affects the thyroid, it affects the adrenals, it affects the whole rest of this endocrine system. And it's going to have a huge impact on how your thyroid and adrenals work, how they function. Same with stress, another hugely important point of leverage. It has a huge impact on the thyroid and the pancreas. So balancing stress, another super important point of leverage. Also has a huge impact on the whole system. Again, if you look here back at this image of the 5 elements, you can see, like, we only touched on this one corner where there are all these other things that are being impacted. Like the adrenals, it has this nurturing relationship with the pineal gland. Well, the pineal gland is responsible for your circadian rhythm. That's your ability to sleep. That's why people who have imbalanced cortisol problems often have insomnia. They wake up in the middle of the night because of this relationship there. So it has impacts there. And the pituitary is the master endocrine gland. You see the relationship there in the feedback loop in the controlling cycle. So this ripples out and affects all these different systems. So question there is then, how do we use these points of leverage? So what do we do? So we did our little poll before. We saw some people are hypoglycemic, some people are insulin resistant, some are both. So what do you do in those different situations? Well, first figure out which you are. If you were one of the people who said you have total normal blood sugar, awesome, that's great. I would just check to make sure that's in fact true. Sometimes it's sort of subclinical and you don't really see it on a level of being a really bad problem, but yet you still have things like if you skip a meal, you still feel irritable and you feel like you're affected by it. That means you could have a little bit of hypoglycemia. It might not show up in the glucose test or the hemoglobin A1C, but you still may have something of an imbalance there. So one way to just kind of check this is how you feel in between and after meals. With hypoglycemic, even subclinical, you get tired between meals, irritable, lightheaded if you don't eat, and eating makes you feel better. With insulin resistance, it's the main kind of hallmark symptom is fatigue after meals, especially after eating carbs. So for balancing blood sugar, some simple things to think about. The autoimmune paleo diet is really helpful. This is a diet that cuts out a lot of refined carbohydrates. So that's going to help balance your blood sugar. Also, how you start your day is super important for blood sugar and your whole rest of the day. So, the common American breakfast is sugar laden. There's tons of sugar in most of the things that we normally associate with breakfast, right? Like cereal, like toast or pancakes or muffins, like all those things are refined carbohydrates and sugars. So it's really important to start your day not with sugar, but with protein and good fat. You can have some of that in there, but you want to balance it with protein and good fat. Also, don't go too long between meals. Get to know your body, get to know what you can do that's sustainable. Consider purchasing a blood sugar meter. This is not something that's expensive nowadays. The technology is amazing on these. You can get really good ones pretty inexpensively now. And if you do get one of those, you want to test both your fasting glucose, which is when you wake up first thing in the morning, what it is. You also want to test your postprandial, which means an hour or two after eating a meal, where the sugar is. And in my book, I talk about where the proper levels are for that. Again, take this seriously. Make it a top priority. This is one of those things. It's almost like common sense. It's almost I feel like this is an area that's super, super important, and a lot of people don't give it the importance. They kind of are looking for a more exotic reason for problems. But a lot of times, balancing your blood sugar is the core problem. So make it a priority. Stress, also, again, blood sugar and stress are not two different things. They're the same thing. So when you have Hashimoto's and autoimmunity, your body is already in a constant state of physiological stress. It's very stressful to have autoimmunity because your immune system is all revved up. Often all these different systems are compromised in some way. Often you have this low energy, you're not sleeping well, all these different compounding factors that keep us in a physiological stress. Also, it's the root source here is inflammation, so that's very stressful on your body. So if you ignore that impact, it's going to undermine your health. And because we have this state of physiological stress, emotional stressors on top of that are for us sometimes really, really hard to deal with. There's other people get those stress, they don't seem to be impacted by it the way we are. Well, that's because it's all this physiological stress. So managing stress is not optional either. If you're serious about healing, you're serious about balancing your blood sugar, you got to have some stress relieving activities and hobbies. And some of my favorites, meditation, I'm a huge fan of. I highly recommend having some sort of morning meditation practice. I like Qigong also. In my book, I teach you all these different Qigong exercises that are helpful for each organ system. Yoga, of course, is fantastic. You get some meditation and some breathing and some stretching and good things there. Walking in nature, another good one. Finding time for hobbies you love, doing things you love to do, painting, music, crafts, or reading, anything. Spending time with your family, all those sorts of things. We have all these electronic devices now. They're really upsetting for many of us. Our circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythm balance is another really important thing. We don't have time to get into that today, but another very important area. So think about turning off your devices at night. Give yourself a break, in the evening. And of course, sleep is very, very important. It's another major leverage point to help you. So that's our basic. I think we're about at the time. About 5:40 right now. I want to get to the questions. Here's just a quick thing. The gift you guys are going to get. So be on the lookout for that email. We'll send you the little starter pack I put together for you guys. There's some recipes. There's chapters in my books about healing the adrenals that I think would be really helpful for you, and a quick start guide. And just to wrap up, I just want to say thank you so much to Hashimoto's Awareness. This group is really near and dear to my heart. Both Fabian and Pearl are doing some amazing work, and they are a not-for-profit organization. They put in a lot of time and a lot of their energy and blood, sweat, and tears into this, and they make it possible to do things like today's webinar and a lot of other great stuff. So please, if you can, help support them because they have a wonderful mission and they're doing great things.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ryan. We are now going to begin answering the questions submitted during the presentation. And as a reminder, you can still submit questions in the question box on your attendee control panel. Pearl, you want to take the first question?
Jump out and go to I'm going to stop my screen and go to the thing so I can see you guys.
Okay.
Great. I will do a question. Sure. So Debbie asks, what else can I do to reduce antibodies?
Just antibodies. Okay. Great question. They're different. I mean, there are two different antibodies. The most common ones are TPO and TGAB, or thyroglobulin. Anecdotally, and things I've seen work for the TPO more, it seems to be more responsive for some reason than the others. I mean, both are. I mean, first, I think, remember a couple things about antibodies. First of all, I think a lot of people get fixated on antibodies and they think wrongly that they're the ones responsible for destruction. Antibodies don't destroy tissue. They are basically like the CIA of the immune system. They identify the bad guys, they collect intelligence on the bad guys, and then other parts of the immune system do the actual destruction. So we want to bring antibodies down, yes, but it's also really important to just reduce systemic inflammation. So specifically for antibodies, we found selenium is helpful. 200 to 400 micrograms per day is a good dose. Bromelain, or there's a product called Wobenzyme that I've had some good success with, which is helpful. Other anti-inflammatories like turmeric, resveratrol, I found glutathione is also helpful. But I mean, I think overall you want to think about what can you do to reduce inflammation, and those things are all helpful. But also remember, what we just the whole presentation is also like blood sugar imbalances and stress are both very inflammatory. So also super important. Great question.
Great. We have a question from Gretchen, and she wants to know what's the best test to check the cortisol levels.
Another excellent question. Yeah, interesting that you brought that up, because there's a couple tests out there now in the market. There's the sort of the standard we've been using for a long time is a saliva test. And with the saliva test, basically you capture saliva throughout the day, take 4 samples. So you do one first thing in the morning, one around noon, one mid-afternoon, one in the evening. That way we can chart your whole cortisol rhythm. That's been the test that's been used for years. Then recently there's a new test that's come on the market called the Dutch urine test, which is the Dutch test, which is a dried urine test, which basically tests metabolites. And I asked this question to Dr. Karazian, who is Pearl and Fabian know. He's been my teacher and mentor for many years. He's another incredibly knowledgeable researcher and clinician and teacher and amazing overall guy, also supporter of Hashimoto's awareness. I put that question to him. He recently did a 2-day training on endocrine system. It was great. And he looked at a lot of research in the Dutch urine test and feels like it's not good. The research to date is not very good. So
the Dutch urine test, is that what it's called?
The dried urine test, yeah, it's called
dried
the Dutch
urine
test.
You can ask for that.
Test the metabolites, and metabolites are what you're coming out in the urine, but it's not necessarily, doesn't correlate necessarily as well with actual cortisol levels. So long answer to the question. It seems the saliva test is the best test still. So that's a test I do with my patients.
Let's see here. Kimberly asks, I've been told I have candida. I have 4 probiotics I rotate. How often should I rotate, and how many times a day should they be taken?
Another excellent question. Yeah, I think rotating is really important. I think variety in your food is also important, because we want to keep that ecosystem of the gut as balanced and varied, and variety is really important for gut health. So in both senses, in both the variety in the bacteria and variety in the foods to feed the different bacteria. I mean, I think that it's hard to say like what's a good, I think your body, so you got to kind of see where you are and test. Have it a couple times a day, 3-4 times a day. Does that make a difference to once or twice a day? I mean, I think you kind of have to do some experimenting there. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule or that, I mean, it's really, the gut is really like a garden, you know, so you're cultivating the garden of your gut, and you got to kind of, just like you do in your garden, you got to do some weeding, you got to do some planting, and some things are going to work and some things aren't, and some plants are going to grow and some aren't, you know, so think of it that way. It's a long-term project for sure.
Thank you. Question from Karen. Do you have any hints on how to sleep? Even when I am tired and ready to sleep, I don't seem to get rest. Would love some tips.
Yeah, great question. And, you know, something that's so important. Again, I think about some of the things we talked about today. You know, how's your blood sugar doing? Is it spiking? Is it not? You know, sometimes, particularly people who are hypoglycemic sometimes have sleep issues as a result of that. Actually, really have both. So trouble falling asleep, I think, is caused by low cortisol. Trouble staying asleep is sometimes caused by high cortisol. If you have a mix there, we both. So I think, you know, critically important, bedtime. Make sure your sugar is balanced, just in general. Sometimes having a snack at night can be helpful. A protein is probably a better choice. That's not true for everyone, though. For some people, it's better to not have something at night. So this is another area we kind of have to experiment, and you got to figure out where you are in the continuum. Also, think about, you know, if you turn off your devices, the blue light is really counterproductive for sleep. I like, yeah, right. Get some red light or these red glasses.
Love it.
Doing some meditation at night, or doing like a guided meditation. There's some really good ones. Those can be helpful. I think also another way to think about this too is like, you know, sleep is part of a cycle. So sometimes when your cycle gets out of whack, then, you know, the morning is also really important in kind of reestablishing the proper cycle. So one of the things you can do to help balance is to work out first thing in the morning, like within a half hour of waking up, doing something, some sort of aerobic activity, even if it's just 5 minutes, doing something first thing in the morning can help with that overall cycle and help kind of kickstart the cortisol the way it should be.
Marina asks, Cyrex food sensitivity test showed that I am sensitive to 90% of the food, parentheses 7 pages long. Cyrex admitted they had never seen this before. Have you?
I've seen, you know, I've worked with a lot of different people, and some people who come to me are really serious, and you know, the gut is, I think, you know, ground zero for what we're going through. So I don't know if I've seen it to that extent, but I have seen people with a lot of sensitivities. So, you know, I think what's really important there is, you know, it's a rebuilding process, and we got to really work on healing the gut and healing the intestinal lining. You want to work on making sure you have sufficient amounts of stomach acid. Sometimes that can cause all these problems downstream. Yeah, it's tough when you get to that place where you have all these sensitivities. I mean, that's really kind of one of the most frustrating places, I know. So one thing I've discovered too is, you know, one thing that really puzzled me after working with a lot of people was people would go on this AIP diet or restrictive diet, and some of them would actually develop more sensitivities, not fewer. And it, like, for a long time, it drove me nuts. And so I did a bunch of research, and I think I figured it out. And it has to do with something called oral tolerance. And oral tolerance is your ability to develop tolerance to different foods. And when you have like that much sensitivity, you've lost some of the mechanisms of oral tolerance. Like when it's gotten to 90% of foods, like that means that's significantly impaired. So I actually did a whole post on that. Marina, if you send me an email, I'll send you like a whole bunch of things you can do in that. Send me an email at marc@hashimotohealing.com. It's a
So
problem.
that, again, that's Marc, M-A-R-C, at hashimotoshealing.com, Marina.
We have a question from Samantha, who is in Rio, Brazil. How wonderful
Oh,
to have you with us tonight, Samantha.
awesome.
Yes,
That's amazing.
fantastic.
Welcome. I love Brazil. And
I
Brazilian
know,
people are the nicest people in the world, I think.
that's right. Is there a relationship between Candida albicans and autoimmune diseases?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that the gut is ground zero. So whenever you have gut dysfunction, yes. So I think there is a relationship. Candida is the result of an imbalance. The species gets out of control because the normal flora of your gut has, for whatever reason, been compromised. So when that happens, it's kind of a chicken and the egg thing. You have, is it leaky gut or is it leaky gut the result? But once that starts to break down, that's when you develop autoimmunity. Absolutely. So yeah, I think it is an important factor, and I think with a lot of Hashimoto's people, we see candida or it's some type of imbalance in the gut. Yeah.
So Liz is asking, what is cortisol?
Cortisol is a hormone produced by the adrenals. It's what we call a steroid hormone. It's basically made from cholesterol. That's because that's one of those interesting things. Like there's something that they call basically your body has a certain amount of cholesterol, and there are these cofactors that lead to cortisol being created from it. It's also other steroid hormones or other reproductive hormones are also come from cholesterol, like testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. And sometimes you see declines in those other hormones because the body is taking so much and making cortisol from it. So it's a steroid hormone produced, and really it has a number of purposes in the body. It's anti-inflammatory, right? It has this countering effect. Many things. In a way, cortisol is kind of like, just like think about it abstractly. It has a lot of functions that bring us back to balance. So it calms the immune system. It like shunts inflammation. It's anti-inflammatory. Like the corticosteroids that people get injected when they have inflammation, it's the same structure as cortisol, and chemically it's very similar. So it has that calming effect there. With insulin, as we looked here in today's presentation, cortisol has a balancing effect with insulin. So in a lot of ways, it's your kind of like your body's fixer. Like there's a problem, like call cortisol. It comes in and does some rebalancing work. So it gets recruited a lot. That's why some people get so depleted, because it's used for all these different things. Great question.
From Liz, I have chosen to go gluten-free. What about casein in milk product? Should I drop them from my diet as well?
Yeah, another great question. I mean, my personal opinion is yes. I think one of the things we were talking about Cyrex before. Cyrex has a test where it's called the gluten cross-reactivity test. And basically what that test is they look at all these different foods that are similar in protein structure to gluten. And that's the real problem, because when we have autoimmunity and the response we have to food is triggered by proteins in food. And really it's not even full proteins. Proteins are made from amino acid sequences, so it's like fragments of these amino acid sequences. And there aren't that many amino acids, so in nature, a lot of these repeat. So a lot of the grains are very similar in structure to gluten. Casein also happens to be very similar in protein and amino acid sequence structure to gluten. So if you have gluten sensitivity, a lot of people also have casein issues. So I'm in favor of both gluten and dairy-free approach.
That's great. That was a great question.
Yeah.
Let me just. Any suggestions for managing Hashimoto's during pregnancy?
Boy, so many good questions today. This is great. Yeah, so, that's like a multi-step question. I think first, we want to try to be as thyroid healthy as we can be before conceiving, because, you kind of want to try to get out in front of it. There are also recommendations. One of the guests that Pearl and Fabian had, Dana Trentini from Hypothyroid Mom, has a great book that she wrote with Mary Schulman about having a healthy pregnancy when you have thyroid issues. Really good book. Highly recommend that. I would get that book. And basically the premise of that is, yeah, make sure you're as thyroid healthy as possible. We want to try, again, the general principles still apply. We want to do everything we can to reduce inflammation. There are within each trimester recommendations for targets of TSH, and it tends to be a little lower than just general TSH recommendations. So it's important to kind of be aware of that and to search for that. Yeah.
No, I was pregnant.
Well, you have experience in this area.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on it because I had, my levels, my TSH was kind of different in the beginning than it was in the end of my pregnancy. So my doctor, being the great doctor she is, changed my dosage of my medication, which helped a lot through the whole thing. And then, of course, adding specific supplements, EPA, DHA was great for my body. I felt so much better on that, inflammation-wise, and getting those fish oils, eating a lot of, good sources of fish proteins, and, eating good fat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I found was great for my healthy pregnancy. So.
Yeah, excellent recommendation. Yeah.
Are we good for one more question, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay. I am confused about iodine intake. I've read in one book that it's okay, and in another one they should avoid it.
Yeah, iodine is like the great controversy of the thyroid world. There's a lot of, here's the thing, like really, there's no question that iodine is important for thyroid function. Like that is without question. The thing is, I've seen some people who've come to me who have been like overzealously treated with iodine, and it really messed up their health, like really did damage. So, I think we have to be very cautious with iodine. What I recommend is always test first to see. You can do a challenge test. There's urine tests or blood tests. I think urine challenge test is the best test to figure out your levels. I don't think the putting it on your skin and seeing how fast it's absorbed test is like the science for that is not great. So don't use that as a test to decide. And if you do elect to do it, I think you really need to pay attention to what's happening to your thyroid, because often what'll happen is the TSH will go up, the antibodies will go up, and it's transient sometimes. Sometimes, like if people have a bad reaction, it'll like really spike, and then like that's telling you like no, abort. So you got to pay attention to what it's doing. I generally recommend, just while the thyroid does need iodine, it doesn't need a ton of iodine. So I'm not a big believer in like the Brownstein school of like massive amounts. I just think it's too dangerous with people with Hashimoto's. Mm-hmm. So I recommend just food sources of iodine, some seaweed and other natural sources, is a number of different vegetables and foods that will give you some iodine. And it's not in dangerous amounts that can result in a bad response.
Great. Well, it's
someday we're going to organize like a battle of the iodine people. We have Dr. Krasian on one side and like Brownstein on the other. We're going to put them in a boxing ring, and then we're going to have like recorders.
The whole point is just you just want to feel good, day to day, hour to hour.
Right.
Sleeping, those are the things to really think about.
Right. At the end of the day, lifestyle things, I think.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. My pleasure. Thank you so much. It was really fun.
Yes, and there's so many more questions, so we will forward that to Dr. Ryan, who
Yeah, just
will.
send me the questions. I'm happy to answer them. I have a Facebook page. I think I'm going to go over afterwards, and I'll just put a post up there, and you guys can come over and if you don't mind having your questions seen by lots of other people, it can help them too.
And we
And
happy to answer it over there too.
Just a reminder, everyone, once you leave today's webinar, you're going to receive a survey on the presentation, and we would so appreciate it if you would just take a few minutes to complete it, because it really helps us hear about your experience and to continue bringing you the webinars that you want, because this is all for you. And what's so exciting is that you're going to receive this follow-up email, which we discussed in the beginning. That in that follow-up email is going to be Marc's link to his free gift. So don't forget to click on that link in the follow-up email that you're going to receive in the next 24 to 48 hours. And also, you're going to be able to view a recording of today's webinar at your leisure too. So there's two links. The number one is the free gift, and the second one is our link to our YouTube channel, where you can watch this as many times as you want. So thank you for joining us tonight.
We post all of our webinars on our YouTube channel, so if you ever miss one, you can always go there.
Yeah.
So thank you, everyone, for being with us. Thank you so much, Marc. And we
Thanks
will
for having me.
come.
Yeah.
Thank you.